Welcome to the Evolving Spiritual Practice podcast. My name is Ralph Cree. This is brought to you in association with bodyheartmindspirit.co.uk. In this episode, I talk with Kim Barta, who is a developmental psychotherapist from America. And we were exploring shadow, psychological shadow, and the three different types of shadow, which we explore in detail, which was good for me because shadow had been a bit of a one-dimensional thing for me, and I hadn't quite passed out these three different types of shadow that we explored together. Kim has been doing this for many years, working with lots and lots of people, and he's also trained in North American shamanism, and not something we explored in this conversation. Perhaps might get him back for another episode and we can explore his training in that shamanism, because that is very interesting. So just a little bit here about Kim. He's worked with individuals, couples, families, multicultural, LGBTQIA, youth at risk, severely mentally ill, chronic pain, mind-body healing, existential dilemmas, and advanced psychosocial spiritual development. Kim is considered the go-to person for those seeking to clear up distortions at the latest research levels of consciousness. His extensive experience spans the age range from infants to the elderly to multi-generational healing. I find Kim to be a very approachable person. He's very friendly, and he's got seriously deep knowledge about psychotherapy and developmental psychology. And at the end of this conversation, he gives the details about a course that he's doing, a year-long course on shadow, meditation and psychology at the different developmental stages that we grow through in our lives. So with that, I will leave you with the conversation with Kim. I hope you enjoy. So Kim Barta, welcome to the Evolving Spiritual Practice podcast.
Thank you, Ralph. Nice to be here with you. Yeah,
brilliant. So you reached out to me recently because you've got a course coming out on shadow work. Mm-hmm. So we're going to explore that and give people a link so they can find it at the end of the show. And I'd come across your work a while back, and also your sister, Terry O'Fallon, through your kind of developmental psychological work. So perhaps we could just start by unpacking what, I think I've listened to you describe yourself as a developmental psychologist. Mm-hmm. And perhaps we could just start with you saying what is a developmental psychologist for people that don't know what that is. That'd be a good place to start.
Thank you. That's a great question. A developmental psychologist is someone who takes in, actually, I would call myself a developmental psychotherapist.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay. And a developmental psychotherapist is a person who takes into account the different perceptions that people have as they move through the developmental spectrum. If you imagine for a moment that, let's say you have a toddler. Toddlers are running around, and if they want something, they'll pull it out of your hand without asking. If another kid has a toy and they want it, they'll grab it. And if the kid resists, they might hit them over the head and take it anyway. This is kind of a normal toddler type behavior. They're getting into pots and pans, and it's a delightful period of time. But their thought processes are not just like little adults. It's different. They don't understand morals yet. They're not anti-moral or amoral, as sometimes people feel. They're just pre-moral. They haven't developed the concept or the understanding of morals yet. And so they don't even see what we would call second person perspective. They're in first person perspective. And so let's just take that for a moment, and then notice just a few years later, a young child who is in second person perspective, and they have theory of mind. And theory of mind helps us understand that other people have consciousness just like ours. Notice the difference between a toddler who will dance naked on the table and one that starts hiding behind their mother's legs because they're shy. This is the beginning of theory of mind. They're starting to see that others can see them. Before that, if they want to play hide and seek, they might close their eyes and cover it with their hands and say, "You can't see me." And if you say, "I can see you," they'll say, "No, you can't. No, you can't." And they'll get really upset. And sometimes parents will think, "Oh, they're just playing and being silly." But no, they actually believe that other people can't see them if they can't see. So the developmental psychotherapist takes into account development of consciousness. So when we get into second person perspective, people start wanting to be fair because they see the whole world of friendship opens up to them. Now they see that other people can see them, that other people have consciousness, and they can actually build a friend. So they go from parallel play, which is in first person perspective, to interactive play, which is in second person perspective. And now they want to be fair because by being fair, they can keep a friend. Instead of hitting their friend over the head to get the toy, they'll actually share the toy so that they can share the friendship. It's a whole different type of consciousness. And then as we move on, we get into principled awareness. So like a child that's maybe 6 or 7 will be fair to somebody right in front of their face, right? But they don't take into account like how to have the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated. This is a principle. They're not quite yet at principles. They can do things in the moment to create good relationships, but they're not quite strong enough on holding principles yet. And so you get someone who's principle oriented and like a child that's in early second person perspective, they'll be fair, but they'll also run off with their friends and do all kinds of things, get into all kinds of trouble, just playing as a horde, as a group, but at 2.5, they'll be principle oriented. And if their friends go off and do something and try and encourage them to do something, they'll stand on their principles.
So when you say 2.5, is that, so 1 is first person perspective, 2 is a second person perspective, 2.5 is sort of like moving out of second person perspective into the next bit. Is that what that means?
Yeah. Well, so we have 1.0 and 1.5. It's the passive form and the active form of the developmental stage. So like 1.0 is like a baby. They're passive. They cry, but you have to be the one to take care of them. They don't take care of themselves. Whereas at 1.5, they're active. They won't just cry to get something. They'll push a stool up to the counter, climb up in the counter and get into the cookie jar without asking at all. So again, it's all about themselves. So you get the passive and the active form. So what we mean by 2.0 is that they're passive in that they're in reciprocity, but they're had by it. If their friend says something mean, they'll say something mean back. If their friend says something nice, they'll say something nice back. But at 2.5, we get active. And if our friend says something mean, we might hold our principle and stay solid in our principle and say, "I'm not going to talk to you that way. That's not right. I still care about you." So you see the difference between the passive form and the active form.
Okay, that's clear.
Okay, so a third person perspective, and this is important because this is where a lot of psychotherapy is tested. They're tested on third person perspective individuals because college freshmen are cheap, easy students to test out. And so a lot of modern psychotherapy is tested out on college freshmen, and college freshmen tend to be in third person perspective. And third person perspective is, if you think of first person perspective, it's all about me, and second person perspective, it's all about we. Third person perspective can take if I'm in interaction with you, Ralph, I can also kind of imagine what it'd be like if a third person was watching us. And then I can go, oh, let's adjust that based upon how, a God in the sky or a third person perspective, and a wise person might observe this conversation. Third person perspective gets into a lot of ideologies. They get lost in those ideologies. I am so sorry about that noise. I'll repeat
That's cool.
that. So in third person perspective, we start moving from principles to ideologies. And you might notice a lot of ideologies in young people. You can have conservative ideologies, you can have liberal ideologies, and the ideology, they're very had by it at 3.0, and at 3.5, they can start manufacturing the ideologies. So as at 3.0, I'm developing all these I'm absorbing these new ideologies. I'm going to school, I'm catching all these new ideologies, these new awarenesses. But I'm not able to do metacognition yet. At 3.5, the end of 3.5, we get metacognition, where we can think about our thinking and explore whether that type of thinking is really a good way to go. It's science, it's a scientific method. And so what we can see is up until 3.5, people can study data, but they can't get the scientific method, which is, I'm going to think about my own thinking. And so what happens is, and then now in fourth person perspective, we start seeing how our culture has shaped us. It's not just me thinking about my thinking. I'm thinking about how my entire life history shaped me to be the way I am. And now I'm starting to take, at 4.5, power over reshaping my whole cultural consciousness and how that developed. So now you can imagine, as a developmental psychotherapist, if you use a particular psychotherapeutic tool, we want to match it to the developmental level of our client. So for example, I might use behaviorism, a loving supportive type of behaviorism with 1.5. I might use, a very relationship-based type of psychotherapy with 2.0. I might explore principles and values with 2.5. At 3.0, we're starting to be able to think about our thinking. So what's really big there? Cognitive restructuring. So CRT or CBT are the major types of psychotherapy that work really well with that developmental level. And of course, that's what almost all psychotherapists are trained to do now, because it's so well researched. And it's well researched with people at third person perspective. But you try to do CBT with somebody in fourth person perspective, and they're going to feel really unseen, unheard, and it's not going to work so well. It'll work well with certain specific things, but it's not going to work well in the overall. You need to come back to a relationship-based, but a relationship-based psychotherapy that's very culturally aware and culturally sensitive and culturally dynamic in terms of their own, not just the culture they were raised in, but their own microculture of their family and how that's affected their consciousness. If you're not getting that, if you're just coming with CBT or cognitive restructuring or EMDR or any of these third person perspective psychotherapies, these people in fourth person perspective are just going to say, you don't get it. And they're not going to feel very fulfilled. Yeah. But if you come with that kind of psychotherapy, a fourth person psychotherapy, and you put it on a third person perspective or a second person perspective or first person perspective, they're not even going to relate to what you're doing. They're not going to get it.
Yeah.
They might even see you as blasphemous if they're 2.5.
Yeah. Well,
so a developmental psychotherapist, instead of saying everybody has to fit into my protocol, a developmental psychotherapist says, I've got a whole bunch of different psychotherapeutic theories and tools in my basket, and I'm going to adapt my skills and tools to the developmental level of my client so that I can better serve them. That's the difference.
Yeah. And I think anyone who's got children, and they're got up into, the teenage years or something, you've seen your children go through all of these stages. And as a parent, you understand how differently you treat a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 14-year-old. You don't use the same methods of instruction, discipline, nurturing. They're very, very different, and people really understand that as parents. But then when we sort of, one of the things where we've got up to third and fourth third person perspective here, and I know your model goes up to sixth person perspective. And there's no reason why that would be the end of it. I don't want to explore that area of it, because our conversation is mainly going to be about the shadow, and we could have a whole conversation about the far reaches of development and the nitty gritty of it. But one of the kind of quite notable things about Western culture, modern culture, society, is that we think that once you hit 18 or 21, that's it, you're done, and you don't really change the rest of your life. And that's one of the really empowering things about this developmental lens on growth, is that you never stop. It's particularly rapid in the first kind of 15, 16 years, 18 years of your life, and that's why it's very noticeable there. And so I think, people so I've got kids, I've got a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I've known about this developmental stuff ever since they were born. And it's been really helpful for me as a parent to not say, when they are only have a first person perspective, I don't try and, I'm not trying to get them to do things that are beyond that, because it's just frustrating for me and for them. I'm going to meet them where they are. And then once, there's this kind of like, magical moment where they can access that second person perspective, and you feel a bit more seen as a parent, and you become a bit more cooperative, and there's, new things that can happen at all of those levels. And it's just kind of applying that kind of homely common sense understanding of this that we all have as parents, but just applying that on a kind of wider scale to humans throughout their entire life, and looking at psychotherapy. And it's really important what you say, because people have their model of psychotherapy, and they just do it for, I'm a CBT therapist, and whoever comes to them, they just do that. Or I'm a Jungian therapist, or I'm a, whatever. And it's a bit harder to kind of advertise or brand yourself as a developmental psychotherapist, because people don't quite understand, you've got too many tools in your box. It's a bit like saying, I'm a versatile musician. I'm not just a jazz person, or I don't just play Afrobeat or something. It's a little bit like that. So people say, well, what kind of music do you play? Well, I play all sorts of things. And do you know what I mean? It's a bit. I don't know whether you found that in terms of trying to, promote yourself as a therapist.
Well, I think you're right on target there. And it brings up a couple different stories. One is that as far as I'm concerned, I haven't had to brand myself. I've been fortunate in that I just get good word of mouth. And so I have full practice without having to brand. And so that's just been a very big gift for me. But it brings me up, what you were just saying was a story when I was a young psychotherapist. Just starting out, I was maybe only a few years into it. And I had a client come to me from another psychotherapist, and they blew out of the other psychotherapist. And so what a good protocol to do is to ask them for permission to talk to the previous psychotherapist, so you can understand what went wrong, and to explore, what might go right instead. And so I called up this previous psychotherapist, respected PhD psychotherapist in town. And I talked to her about the client, showed the right to speak to her. I had a signed release of information. And she said, oh yeah, that client, she's a treatment failure. And I go, what do you mean a treatment failure? Well, I put her through the treatment and she failed. I go, well, what treatment did you use? And she said CBT. CBD, CBT, not CBD, CBT. And so cognitive behavioral therapy, or cognitive restructuring therapy. And she failed. So she's a treatment failure. I go, wow, okay. So I hung up, and I never consider any of my clients a treatment failure. I consider, if my client doesn't get better, it's my failure as a therapist to not figure out how to help them get better. I don't take it all on. I mean, everybody has to take their own responsibility in healing, but I certainly wouldn't call somebody a treatment failure. But what I learned from that was, of course, CPT wasn't the right tool to use for that person. So I used a relationship-based psychotherapy that had some cultural awareness to it. And the person flourished. They did great. They healed very quickly, had a great time, successfully completed therapy, and essentially went on to have a better life. I never heard any other complaints from them since. So it's just the awareness that if you only have one tool in your basket, like a carpenter, if all you have is a hammer, then you're trying to saw through a plank with your hammer. It's just not effective. It doesn't work well. And so one of the good things about being a developmental psychotherapist is you learn all of the tools, as many as you can, and you apply them to in a way that matches the developmental level of the client.
Yeah, that story really helps illustrate the point. That's brilliant. Yeah. So we were going to kind of dive into exploring the shadow. And I think the first thing, there's 3 types of shadow we're going to explore, which is something I've learned through encountering your work, because, my understanding of the shadow was a bit kind of one-dimensional, I suppose, with the not passing it out into these 3 different types. So perhaps if we could just start with you defining what we mean by the shadow, and then we can unpack that, please. Thanks.
Wonderful, Ralph. So the shadow is basically Jung's term for the unconscious. Freud studied the unconscious scientifically. He didn't discover the unconscious, as many people think. The unconscious was well known even millennia before then. Even if you read like Plato's allegory of the cave, you can see that there's this awareness of the unknown, almost the unconscious. He doesn't describe it in the way of understanding the unconscious, but there's already hints there. And the allegory of the cave is actually a beautiful allegory for the unconscious, actually. Even though that's not exactly what Plato was trying to say in that. He was trying to say something maybe a little more profound than that even. But anyway, Freud was the first one to systematically, scientifically study the unconscious in the Western Hemisphere. Of course, in the East, they studied and explored shadow 2,000 years prior in one of the Chinese dynasties. I can't remember it right now, which one it was, but they actually have writings on exploring the unconscious a little bit there. But anyway, on the Western Hemisphere, Freud studied it. It's the unconscious. And then Jung was Freud's student, and he renamed the term the shadow, which actually kind of really popularized it. Now, today, when people talk about shadow and the unconscious, they might talk about it differently. Shadow's kind of moved, it's kind of morphed a little bit in its definition to being those unconscious personality traits that can be a problem, as opposed to the whole unconscious, which is the entire, regulatory system that runs through the unconscious mechanisms of our being.
Yeah, and that's when people tend to say, "Oh, that person's got some shadow issues" or something. They're talking about, specific character traits, not the whole kind of deep water in the lake, type of thing. That's that dark water at the bottom. Yeah.
And yet that whole field, the whole unconscious, there's so much rich stuff to explore there, just beyond the, outward expressive personality traits that have dark elements to them or dysfunctional elements to them. There's a lot of power there to be had. So for me, I term the shadow the entirety of the unconscious, but I'm respectful of people that say, no, it's just these personality traits.
Okay. So, and then, so you kind of passed it out into these 3 main types of shadow. And as far as I can gather, we've got split ego states. Is that one of them? Projections.
Yes.
And so that's an outward projection. And then the opposite, which you call an introjection. Right. Is that right? Yeah.
That's right. Exactly true.
So these are, these are interesting. So I'd like to kind of explore those 3. And where's the best place to start with those? Which one of those 3 makes the most sense?
So maybe as a segue, just talking about how before you encountered my work, you said shadow was kind of like this kind of blob thing
Yeah.
that
Okay.
was,
Well, I'd say, yeah,
you know?
I'll tell you what, I'll tell you the type of, I mean, I think I've been exploring, what you've been calling just the unconscious through that, mainly through meditation and psychedelics.
Mhm.
But then I've been doing psychotherapy for about 14 years, but that's been working with more specific recurring character traits, which are, with the help of my therapist, who is a developmental psychotherapist called Gary Hawke. Highly recommend working with him. So that's been more about bringing out some of these ways of being that are quite clear to my therapist or some of my friends or people I meet, but not so much to me. And they're kind of almost automatic behaviors, and I can't see myself doing it. But then through working with my therapist, and he's helping me see these parts of myself from lots of different angles, to kind of, so I can say, it's literally feels like bringing it out of the dark, just kind of, and shining lots of lights on it, putting spotlights on lots of angles, like, whoa, okay, I can feel it, I can actually feel myself doing that, and they become what you might call conscious, and at a place where I can actually operate effectively from that place, consciously, rather than just it riding me, so to speak. And there's lots of kind of little threads to it, but there's often, well, there's been kind of like a handful of main themes that we've worked with, this on a personal level for me. So I've been doing both types of what we've just been talking, that kind of, the whole exploration of the depths, but then with this kind of specific traits. And one of the things that, has been a kind of back pocket shadow practice for me is noticing things that I react strongly to. And then that's normally a sign that it's something I'm either very attracted to or repulsed by. And the inquiry is all of it's like, oh, okay, right, I'm really, really attracted to that person, some of their qualities or characteristics or whatever, or I'm really repulsed by that person or that fictional character or something. And it's like, well, what's why am I feeling like that? Because I learned that I'm reacting to a part that's inside myself, and I want to integrate that. Now, that sounds a bit abstract. I'll give you an example. It happened just the other night. I was watching Stranger Things. It's this like horror show on Netflix, and there's this kind of dark wizard guy who's all kind of, just bare muscles all creeping around and on his skin, and he's really dark and creepy and evil, and he walks up to these kids they're on their own, they're all alone, and he's calling their name, and he comes up to them and he kind of puts his hand on their head and just breaks their body, and they die. And that's as far as I've got in the show, so there might be more to it, but I haven't watched further than that. And I was on my own packing up this tent in the dark in the woods, and I suddenly kind of like felt this guy there, and I became a bit like one of these kids, and this guy was coming up to me, and I was like starting to freak out, and then I suddenly was like realized, it just hit me that I am that character for other creatures. I'm thinking, I don't eat a lot of animals, but in my life I've eaten a lot of fish and things like that. I've chopped down trees, I've eaten plants, so I am that guy, to other, breaking the bodies and just menacing. I've been the worst nightmare for other creatures many times in my life, and owning that was really, it was difficult because I don't want to be that. It's a difficult thing to come to terms with, that you are the worst nightmare, for other creatures. But it totally diffused the feeling of threat of this guy being outside of myself, and all of a sudden I wasn't scared anymore, because it was like, well, I am that person, so I've got to own the fact I am that scary for other people, other creatures. So it's more, that's the kind of thing that I've been doing. So and when I hear people talking about the shadow, just in podcasts and videos and that kind of thing, it seems to be the main understanding of it is these specific character traits, that we've all got unique cluster of shadow character traits. There might be golden shadows where things we think we don't have, like excellence, or that we're attractive, or we're powerful, those kind of things. But then also the darker sides, like what I've just illustrated about being a violent, menacing, nightmarish creature, yourself. And that's a bit of a ramble, but does that shed some light on what you were looking for?
That's absolutely perfect, Ralph. And that's really a perfect segue, because that's how a lot of people see it. And that's how a lot of people work with it. And it's a very good way to work. It's a very powerful way to work. But notice that the bias was towards integrating.
Yeah.
And that's what we do with split ego states. And it works great with split ego states. So what I started realizing was that, wait a minute, not only do we have development, but we have 3 classes of shadow: introjects, projections, and split ego states. And you have to work completely different with each one of those, because if you work the wrong way, you can actually cause damage. So imagine that scenario again. Okay. Let's say you were a female in the woods who had been raped as a 3-year-old. And you've had this dark, menacing experience around you. And then you go, oh, I need to integrate that. What we're really integrating is an introject from the rapist. And now we're taking something that's not me, that I've been carrying, that's from somebody else, and I'm integrating it even more deeply into me, and I'm actually causing damage now.
Yeah.
So what I became aware of is that all of the therapeutic tools are good if they're applied to the right style.
So in that example,
wrong style of shadow, you can cause damage.
Yeah. So in that example you were just saying, so you're a woman, you've been, or a man, let's say I was, well, I mean, I don't mind saying this publicly. I had a sexual abuse incident when I was younger at school. I went to a boarding school, and I had that. And so, I can feel, so to integrate that person who did that to me into myself, that doesn't feel right. And in what you're saying, so you're saying that it's actually, I've got more of a kind of natural instinct to just spit that out from my system, but to integrate more the feelings around that, or something, or to make myself heal from that experience. But I don't want to heal from that experience by incorporating this guy who did something nasty to me when I was young.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what might be happening with this dark external presence, some of that might be you. We're humans. We're one of the most destructive creatures and horror creatures to the rest of the planet that there is. Even if we just live in our normal, American or European lives, we're creating a lot of damage. So I think it's important to incorporate that horror in ourselves, just to take ownership of who we are and what we're about, and help us make better decisions. But if we've suffered trauma, how much of that was actually an introject that exaggerated that feeling beyond what our responsibility is to hold? So we want to take what our responsibility is to hold, but we don't want to carry the horror of the perpetrator inside of us and introject that into us, because we actually cause more damage. So we have three classes of shadow: introjections, projections, and split ego states. And what we want to do is understand that with split ego states, we want to integrate, just like you did, and it relieved your fear. So there was accuracy in that. That was good. But if you were dealing with introject and you tried to incorporate it, it would feel very toxic. It would not feel good. But yet we have psychotherapists that bias towards integrating everything. Everything needs to be integrated. Well, no, we don't want to integrate everything, because we will cause damage to our clients if we integrate everything. We have other people that are only into expressive therapies. It's all about releasing. Well, now what I'm doing is I'm taking stuff that's mine and I'm giving it out to the world. So express your anger, express it. And what we're doing is we're just taking our own shadow and we're dumping it on the external world, causing all kinds of pain and suffering on the world.
So you'll say with this sort of sexual abuse example, it would be more appropriate to release aspects of that.
Yes.
Forever, be gone, just waft off into historical time, bye-bye, good riddance type of thing. Yeah?
This is not me, and I don't need to own it anymore.
Yeah.
I don't need to carry it anymore.
And then the difference with, let's say, a projection, let's say, someone had never felt powerful. They were amazed by, attracted to people who seemed powerful, and so that's a kind of, you're projecting your own actual power,
exactly.
that you have as an autonomous agentic human being onto other people who may be powerful people themselves, but you've got there's an extra charge to your kind of, oh my God, that person's so powerful. Right. I feel so weak and helpless, So then you're projecting it outwards onto that person. So then rather than releasing it, what are we talking? So what do we do there?
What we need to do is re-own our projections. Okay. We re-own our projections. And this is kind of what you did too with the dark thing that was outside of you, right? You said, oh, it's outside of me. Wait a minute. That's me. I'm going to re-own it. And then what you did was you began some aspect of by re-owning it, it took away your fear. So fear, anger, resentment, irritability, frustration, those are all examples of projection. We're actually projecting our power out onto the world, and then we get frustrated that we don't have the power to cope. We live in fear, we live in powerlessness. And so what we want to do is bring that power back inside of us, so that we don't live in fear, that we don't live in doubt, that we don't live in in worshiping people outside of us that are so powerful. I mean, you can really see it, for example, in a lot of the Trump movement. So many people are disowning their own power and giving Trump the power to tell them what reality is. This is a classic projection of our power, our own intelligence, our own capacities out onto a strong figure. And a lot of people who have been treated a certain way in childhood, to bring it back into parenting, if we're spanked a lot, if we're dominated a lot by our parent, we might rebel and become the rebellious child. And we might even start being the rebel without a cause. I just rebel for the sake of rebelling. On the other hand, I might be a very conformist to very powerful people. And so we can see how the parenting dynamic sets us up for particular shadows. In this case, giving away our power to a strong authoritarian. There's a lot of people around the world, not just in America, all over the world, that really want a strong authoritarian leader. They don't want democracy. They want a strong authoritarian leader to tell them what to do because it feels secure. And if their strong authoritarian parent was a relatively kind one or a relatively caring one, even though it was dominant and controlling and told them how to live their life. But if there was enough caring and love and respect, then you can see how bonding becomes a bond to strong, powerful, clear, dominant people. And they're going to feel secure in that. and others that are raised in maybe a place where parents really encourage the child's participation in the family and the child's essence to unfold within the family. They're probably not going to like that strong authoritarian type of person. They're going to tend to see them as controlling rather than supportive. And so we can see how the way we were raised sets us up for different shadow, different political orientations, all kinds of different things.
So, this one's a big one. The theme of this podcast is spiritual practice, and lots of spiritual practitioners end up doing this with gurus and spiritual teachers, and this is like a classic hazard of getting instruction from people.
That's right. This is a huge one.
Spiritual practice.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. At stages, we tend to attract quite a few people too. And many of them have been in spiritual cults, for lack of a better word, or followed spiritual gurus that actually abuse them. And it's easy for people to project on us even. And we keep giving that back, saying, oh no, we're giving you back your power and your wisdom. We can teach you certain things, but we're not here to help you become the wisest, most powerful being you can be inside yourself. So we often have to deflect the projection, the positive projections back, and they're enticing to hold on to. It's like, oh, wow, this person is seeing me, as their guru. And it's like, that's fine. But but my tendency is to always, thank you, but I want to give you back your power. I might have something to offer you, and I'm happy to do that. But I want you to have your power so that you can go live your more full, robust, fulfilled life.
So then we've got the split ego aspects of it.
Yes.
So could you just describe what that, because we're integrating our projections, and then it sounds like we're integrating these split ego states as well, but they're different. Split ego states are different to projections.
Yes. So let's look at the difference. If our conflict is outside of us, we're upset with a political party, a political figure, a neighbor, anything outside of us, that's probably, we're going to look in the realm of projection. I'm giving something away, and that's triggering me so much outside of me. So we need to figure out what the projection is and bring it back. Now, a lot of times people just say, take it all back, but we don't want to take it all back. We need to hone down into what the actual projection is and take the projection back. Now, if our problem is internal, like, oh, I can't make this decision. I'm confused. I'm beating myself up inside. I can't make a decision. I'm indecisive. That's an internal split, right? So now we got split ego states, and split ego states. We want them to work well together.
An example might be you've got inside. You've got like two voices. One saying, I just want to sit down and chill, and then the other side of you going, no, you've got this work to do, and you can't rest, right. That's the kind of that's what we're talking about.
That's right. That's a split ego state. Now, when we have a split ego state, we need to make some assessments here. Okay, we need to get clear on whether we split ourselves in two, which we have to do as we grow up. For example, to get into second person perspective, we have to split ourselves in two in a healthy way, so that I can see from my own perspective and I can see from your perspective. And you'll often see children at this stage go, well, I want to do this, but it wouldn't be fair. So you see that split ego state, but that's a healthy split ego state. They're aware of their own ego, their own personal want, but they're also aware of the other person's want. And so that would be what I would call a healthy split ego state. And I think what we have to do is have healthy split ego states. We do it each time we move to a new developmental level. We get a split ego state. But eventually those all come back together then and reintegrate. But you have to be aware of that, and then you have to be aware of it, and then eventually you can get to post development where that comes together.
I just thought of another example of that might be, let's say someone grew up as a fundamentalist Christian or something, and then suddenly they kind of, this splitting happens where they start to question it, and then all of a sudden they switch. I mean, I've met people like this really quickly. They're like, whoa, okay, all religion is bullshit. And just this kind of rejection phase when you just go, it's a bit like being a reformed smoker. You've just given up smoking and you just can't bear to be around. Look at those people smoking, it's disgusting, and but given enough time, time is such a healing thing, and it's an amazing thing that time does this. But over time you kind of soften to that kind of pushing off from what was there before, and become sometimes people get a bit more friendly to it. It's like, okay, I was overreacting, or I was not all religion's rubbish, and that kind of thing. Become less of a militant atheist, for example.
Exactly. Because what's happening is we don't just as a whole conscious pop into a new developmental level. So you're describing the move from 2.5 second person perspective advanced to third person perspective, where we can look in and see how we were raised, the fundamentalism that we were raised in, the masks that we had to wear, and we start wanting to take off the masks. But our whole consciousness doesn't just pop into third person perspective. A part of our consciousness wakes up and sees it, but a part of us has still got that fundamentalist inside of us. And so what we do is what you just described is how one ego state looks back at another ego state and rejects it, but doesn't want to see that it's inside. So now we're projecting it outward on all those other people that are fundamentalist. And now we're reacting to all those external events.
Being fundamentalist yourself about fundamentalists, you become a fundamentalist, rejecting it. Yeah. But then not seeing the joke, yourself.
Not seeing the joke, right? And so what we need to do is take back our own fundamentalism and really wrestle with it internally. It's uncomfortable, so it's easier to just project it out. It's all those people. I'm already enlightened, but I'm only coming from that one part of my ego state. So we take back the projection and then we start working with that. But here's the trick. When we take the projection back, it's not necessarily just a healthy ego state. It could be an introject. For example, fundamentalism may have been crammed down my throat by a very abusive person.
Yeah. So an example might be, I know people that went to convents and they had nuns telling them, you're going to go to hell.
That's right.
Yeah.
Beating them while they're doing it.
Yeah.
And so now what we have is these introjects. So when we take a projection back, we need to get clear, is this an actual normal, healthy split ego state inside of me? Or is this actually an introject that I absorbed and then it became so painful that then I also projected it out onto the world? So when we take a projection back, we have to do that inquiry, that deep exploration about how much is this a part of me and how much was this an introject that I need to release back to the source that gave it to me.
Yeah, like if you were to release something, it's almost like nature herself will digest it, and if so with the split ego states, so we've got, if we stick with this example as someone who they're conflicted about just wanting to chill or be really active and get stuff done. It's quite a mundane example, but it's one everyone can relate to, I think.
Absolutely. Classic split.
So we've got these two sides. They both got their own truths. Sometimes it really is appropriate to chill. Sometimes it's really appropriate to, get after it. So what are you suggesting one does in that circumstance?
Okay. So,
and how does this, and how is this a shadow question?
Yeah. So at first I might not even be aware of the split. I might just be aware of being really confused and not sure what to do. I go to work, but then I just find myself eating pizza in front of Netflix and feeling guilty about eating pizza in front of Netflix, and then going out and trying to do some work. I'm really had by it. So it's really in shadow. You're describing someone who's already cleared up some of the shadow and can see, oh, look, I have this part of me that just wants to chill, and this part of me that wants to work.
Yeah. Oh, and that's so, that's really important I just want to put the zero in on that quite often as people, we're just distressed. We're upset, we're discombobulated, we're acting weird, we don't quite know why. And then this is one of the great things about being in a relationship, so like I might be like that, and my wife might say, well, look, she can see what the problem is, really, do you want to chill, or she help, she like, you seem to be wrestling with, do you want to chill or do you want to get this job done? And then we might start talking about it, and she helps me say, well, look, why don't you chill today and then do the work tomorrow or whatever, and then you start, it's out of the shadows, and it's an object that you're both looking at together. And
yes, exactly. Now let's go into that just a little bit more, because precision is, the devil is in the details, they say, right? And so I have this part of me that, wants to chill, and this part of me that feels like I need to work. And now I'm going to look at this part, and I'm going to look at this part that says I need, I want to chill or I need to work. We're going to look at both of them. But let's take the one that wants to work at this point. How much of that is me actually working from passion? And how much is that me feeling like I need to work because I'm guilty? I feel guilty because I'm not working. Now we're dealing with a split ego state within a split ego state.
So an example of that might be what people call the Protestant work ethic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I might have been beaten if I didn't work hard, or ridiculed by my parent, or I was just taught the Protestant work ethic. So now what I have is a split ego state that's divided between my true passion of work and my guilt about I need to work. So what we need to do is split that split ego state, send back the introject of the guilt around work. And now all we're left with pure passion of work. And now that pure passion interacts differently with the passion of being. So we have the passion of being and the passion of doing now. Now, imagine what happens if I try to integrate these two ego states while I still have that introject on the other one, the work ethic. Now what we have is we're trying to integrate these two ego states, but that work ethic half that's not us is shaming and blaming the one that wants to relax and chill out. Right? But if we can divide off that introject and send it back, now what we have is pure passion of being and pure passion of doing. And they interact very well together.
And
back to our spiritual states, right?
And in fact, it is possible to chill while doing. So if we were to we've passed out the kind of introjects, all that the culture, the negative super, what used to be called, I don't know whether it still is, the super ego thing of the whatever, just bashing, like you shouldn't be chilling, and then we got the kind of that kind of exuberant passion for being energetic and doing stuff. You've got the chilling thing. You don't actually need to choose one or the other. So one thing I do a lot of manual work and domestic tasks, a lot of it. But for me, I get in the zone when I do it, and it almost there's nothing I enjoy more than mowing the lawn or doing the dishes or ripping old cabinets off the walls and just stuff like that. Just so at the same time, I am really being and doing at the same time. I'm having a flow, what people call a flow state. I find it very relaxing. I'm not thinking about existential questions. I'm just there. So, that's a thing too, that, you don't necessarily have, it's not a binary thing. You have to choose one or the other.
That's right.
Yeah.
We move into that. So if we're aware of the split ego state, what happens is when we integrate, they start merging together until they become one, and we don't have the split anymore. And we have these whole stages in between where that is merging, but there's still separation to some degree. And but you're describing that state where they've come together, and doing is being is doing, and this flow state arises, and the more they integrate, the more that flow state arises.
Cool. So the general orientation for this seems to be healing, making us whole, but making us a healthy whole. So let's think of like a cell doesn't just suck in everything around it. It's got this kind of selectively permeable membrane which is designed to let certain things in and to reject other things, push things out, or let things not even be able to come in. Mm-hmm. So is our natural state a state of healthy wholeness, or is this is kind of a little bit of thing where you've got an evolutionary developmental perspective and then one that's a bit more static. So my understanding of a developmental and evolutionary unfolding is that you become increasingly whole and healthy. Mm-hmm. And that it's not, whilst at the same time recognizing that everything is perfect the way it is, because everything is nature, mm-hmm. one thing, one mm-hmm. being, mm-hmm. that is what it is, he is, she is, they mm-hmm. is, whatever, whatever the pronoun is for this cosmic supreme being that we all are. How do you know what I'm trying to describe there? There's the kind of things already perfect as they are and whole mm-hmm. and healthy, but also this developmental perspective is that the opportunity it's not the opportunity. That's a kind of like a bit more of the sort of achiever type of thing, sees the opportunity to develop. It's an actual, some people describe it as an erotic force within life itself to become more all the time, become more whole by growing, and become increasingly healed. I mean, it's so yeah. I mean, does that any of that make any sense? And is this, do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. So we talk about states, stages, and shadow. So state experiences are like these fleeting experiences, but they have these little wake up experiences. They're altered states. Now, often people call these spiritual states, but secular people have them too. They just don't call them spiritual states. I don't have an opinion whether people call them spiritual or not. I think if the term spiritual really helps you feel alive, then that's great. It's interesting. I've worked with these spiritual states and with the scientists that have no belief in a spiritual world, and they start tingling and they go, I think this is what people call spirituality. That's the term that they give it, so it's real, no matter how you look at it. But each developmental level sees spirituality differently again. And what you're describing is more like a fifth person perspective where everything's perfect and everything's evolving simultaneously. That's a very advanced perspective if you can actually hold that in honesty and truth in your heart. But you might take a child who's 3 years old, and a spiritual state is like being tickled. That's just like an unbelievable spiritual state, or the spiritual state of getting theory of mind, all of a sudden getting a little shy and then poking back out and going, oh, or the spiritual state of peekaboo for even younger, right? I mean, they just laugh and giggle. It's just the most delighted thing in the world when they start getting that peekaboo thing. That is a state experience. And then it becomes a stage structure where, oh yeah, I know you, you're behind. And all of a sudden it doesn't have much meaning anymore. One of the things that I do is I create meditation, spiritual or otherwise meditations that are adapted to the developmental level of the person. I was in Yosemite last year, and I ran across a couple young women from India. And I just asked them if they meditated, and they said, the one said, yes, I meditate. And the other one said, I used to, but it just doesn't have any meaning for me anymore. It doesn't work. And I go, well, that's probably because you've outgrown it. What meditation were you using? And she described a classic third person perspective meditation, you know, kind of like that. Have a thought, let it go, have a thought, let it go, have a thought, let it go kind of a thing. And so but I talked to her, and it only took me a few minutes to see that she was clearly in fourth person perspective, not third person perspective. So I gave her a fourth person perspective, which was, instead of have a thought and let it go, how about a meditation of when you feel love, instead of going, love comes up and I let it go, love comes up, let me wrap up the whole world with that love. And she just started crying immediately. It was just, you know, in fourth person perspective, it's not about letting go. It's about this, about holding the whole world. So we start having spiritual states of holding the whole world in our love, you know, rather than trying to control our mind with these, you know, monkey mind and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And she started crying. And now that was a meaningful, powerful meditation for her. And she wanted to meditate now. And she said she was going to do that because it just touched her so deeply. And the other one, did that meditation too, and it was very powerful for her, and she was kind of crossing from 3.5 to 4.0. So you can see that these meditations grow from one developmental level to another, and certain meditations just get boring for people because they've mastered them already, but they're being told to do them, and they often feel guilty that they're not doing their meditation. And for me, you know, being very custom oriented to the client rather than telling clients to meet that, that's the same thing as the developmental psychotherapy. It's the non-developmentally aware spiritual teacher that tells them do this meditation, and they're not taking into account the developmental level of the student. So they just start them at the beginning with concentration, and anybody who's got a PhD or gone to school has already mastered concentration. We don't need to go through a meditation of concentration. People get bored and then they go, I don't like meditation.
And that's you've got really complete developmental systems, like Tibetan Buddhism, for example, has this, you know, very, very detailed developmental thread through it from beginning to end. And it you know, and then you've got other types of meditation practice which are much more kind of they're kind of mono practice. It's just you've got the one thing, and you just do that. And I think that, you know, that's really, really important point you raise, and it's easy when you line it up with things you observe naturally anywhere in your life, like being a parent with children going through developmental stages and the different types of parenting you use, all of that, and then what you said about the levels of stages we grow through and the different psychotherapeutic techniques, and it makes perfect sense for meditation practices, for example, to follow the same structure and all these other things. But it's like, quite often I've found, you know, and I'm as guilty as anyone else, that we think that spiritual practices or spirituality follows different rules to, say, learning a musical instrument, you know, or anything like that. I mean, a musical instrument would be another good example. You know, you kind of you're aiming for making music together with people, but at the beginning you've got to get the kind of physical limb and finger coordination down. You've got to learn some rudiments, some scales. You do a little bit of music making, but you still got to do all of that, and you're kind of working with a teacher and teaching all of that sort of thing. But then when you get to a certain level, you kind of outgrown what that teacher can teach you, and a good teacher. And I'm talking from personal experience. I was a drum teacher for 14 years, and you know, at a certain point, you know, you can't teach people things, and you say, well, you've got to go off and either explore on your own or find someone else who can take you further. And you know, it's kind of all over there once you start recognizing it, and you can see it everywhere. And then perhaps we could just look at noticing the time. We could just wrap this up with maybe this might be difficult to do, but no, I'm not even going to. I was going to say we could explore shadow at different stages, of growth, but I think that's way too a bigger topic to end to end. We can't wrap that one up in 5 minutes, unless you think you can.
Well, maybe I can say this. I can do a little promotion too. Our shadow and light journey, if that I teach, what I do in that is, and this can be educational for everybody here on your podcast, is we take the developmental levels, developmental growth or evolution, and we work with it with shadow, and we work with it with states, and we work with it with stages. And what we do is I have meditations for every developmental level, from first person perspective all the way up through sixth person perspective. And so when we do this, you have the state experiences of the meditation, and these meditations are designed to fill out and make whole each developmental level, so that each developmental level is whole and full in and of itself, so that you have a more flow experience, not just laterally, but vertically up and down the developmental spectrum. So what I do is I have developmental meditations, and then we go through it with shadow, with states, and with the stages, of course. This is like a whole year-long deep dive. It's a real deep transformational work, and we do this in community, of a small community of about 14 to 16 people, so that we can really work with each other in an intimate and caring environment. And I teach us how to hold space and be there for each other, and how to help manage group and do group work, and be present for each other. And then we're getting trained in, I train the developmental meditations. So meditation at 1.0, 1.5, 2.0, 2.5, all the way up to 6.5. And it's okay if you're not at the later developmental levels. Most people aren't, but people that have taken the course still feel like they get a value of it, and kind of a little boost at listening to these later developmental meditations. And then we really hold space for each other. We take time to really care and hold space, and teach each other how to hold space for introjects or projections or split ego states. And I also train people on the evolution of shadow resolution, because a lot of times people get stuck in, like we were just talking about, how we're unaware, and then we try to make things aware, and then we just try to change from there. But sometimes what we do is we become aware, but we're in symptom aware. We're aware of the symptoms. And what do we do in symptom aware? We just try to get rid of the symptoms. We don't get to the deeper underlying wisdom that comes from that. And so we lose that wisdom. So we go from symptom aware to trigger aware to internal process aware to conscious conceptualization. And we actually do a much deeper dive into how you really resolve the whole shadow process, and actually gather the incredible treasures that are held inside of us, that are hiding underneath the blanket of the shadow. And so that's what this process is about, is a complete year-long transformational experience.
Sounds really deep. And I mean, I've been listening to quite a lot of your podcasts and those and YouTube videos, and in preparation for this. And well, the first thing to say is you obviously have a lot of experience in this. Decades of work with must be thousands of sessions under your belt, but also very, very granular knowledge. I mean, what I was been consciously trying to do in this conversation is to ground the conversation in very kind of homely examples and things people can grasp, because you seem to have a very, very detailed theoretical knowledge of this stuff too, which I think is great. If anyone's doing this course, it's going to be deep, it's long, it's thorough, with other people. So where do people go to find out how to sign up for this course?
Yeah, just go to my website, kimbarta.org, not kimbarta.com. Somebody else owns that who's not using it. kimbarta.org. And you'll see my courses there. I got Illuminating Shadow if you just want to kind of dip your toe in. It's a very inexpensive course to get started. Oh, the other thing is that I have a free a free shadow assessment. So if you're interested in these different types of shadow, you can go to kimbarta.org and take the free assessment, and it will give you, it will automatically calculate your dispersion of what percentage of your shadow is introjects, what percentage is projections, and what percentage is split ego states. And now keep in mind, you're going to get 100% total on that. That doesn't mean you're 100% shadow. It means of your shadow, this is your distribution of introjects, split ego states, and projections. And then you get a free customized PDF that addresses that for you. You'll get a free video, and then you get a free eight session mini e-course on shadow. So that's all free. That's just what I give. And then you can take illuminating shadow, you can take healing shadow, you can take communing with shadow, which is similar to what I just described without the meditation. So it's just the deep dive, but all about the shadow, and really deep dive about healing shadow. That's a year-long immersive program too. And that's where we deal with the 3 types of shadow and the evolution of shadow resolution. And we really learn how to hold space with the community. And then there's the shadow and light journey, which is the whole deep dive communing with shadow with the developmentally informed meditation, stage growth. So you'll find that all on kimbarta.org.
Wow, treasure trove.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And it's all about finding the treasure in you and in everybody who comes in. That's what it's about. Shadow isn't just about diving in and being miserable, for 30 years until you get better. It's about releasing these things, or absorbing getting back your power, letting go of the monkey on your back that isn't yours, integrating, and then finding the treasure that arises, the hidden treasure. So part of it is the healing, but the other part is finding the hidden treasure that was covered over by the shadow blanket. So not only is there the healing that arises, but then it's discovering that treasure that was hidden by that blanket too.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's been a real pleasure to connect with you, Kim. And,
likewise with you, Ralph.
Yeah. And, I hope some people benefit from getting this more granular knowledge on the shadow and this developmental perspective. And I hope people sign up to your course and become increasingly whole and healed and amazing people. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ralph. It was great meeting you and being with you here.
I made all the music that I use in my podcasts. If you'd like to hear more of my music, please visit SoundCloud and check out my profile, Ralph Cree.